So over the last 12 weeks, I have been going through a photo shoot prep, and I have taken myself from this to this. And in the process of doing so, I've lost 13 kilos. And here's exactly what I did to do that. Now, it's not rocket science. It's easy to get caught up in thinking that you need to be doing some fantastic new plan, but it's more about being consistent with the basics that's going to elicit the best fat loss results. Now, the biggest needle mover in terms of fat loss is always going to be your nutrition. You take care of that and everything is going to follow suit. And nutrition is quite often the biggest minefield for a lot of people, so we want to try and keep it as simple as possible. So for me, I created what I call a flexible meal plan. I gave myself 2 to 3 options for breakfast, 2 to 3 options for lunch, and 2 to 3 options for dinner. Meals that I knew fitted within my calories, meals that I enjoyed most importantly, and this allowed me to rotate them in any particular order, depending on what my taste or fancy was that day, and I would still hit my calorie targets. Now in week 1, my calorie targets were a lot higher than they were in week 12. So in week 1, my calorie targets were as follows: 3,675 calories on training day, which consisted of 250 grams of protein, 500 grams of carbs, and 75 grams of fat. On a rest day, slightly less calories to account for the fact that there's less activity going in, and that was 3,275 calories. Again, 250 grams of protein, 400 grams of carbs this time, and still 75 grams of fat. Now, obviously over the weeks, as fat mass reduces, energy requirements change. So by the time I got to week 12, calories were considerably lower. And the final week's calories were 2,850 on a training day. Protein was down to 240, carbs were down to 360, and fats were down to 50. And on rest days, similar pattern, they were lower again. And these were the lowest they got at any point of the photoshoot prep at 2,520. Again, 240 grams of protein, but a reduction in carbohydrates, which meant they ended up at 300 per day and fat ended up at 40 grams per day. But what's important is that despite the fact that my calories reduced over the period of the 12 weeks, my food didn't actually change a whole lot. I kept the same structure of the flexible meal plan, having the 2 to 3 meal options that I enjoyed, but all I would do is manipulate the variables. So where carbs might lower, I might reduce my potato intake, I might reduce my rice intake, have slightly less salad, but ultimately the meal would stay the same. And this is really, really important, because one of the biggest problems a lot of people have when they are dieting is they're trying to create fresh meals from scratch. It creates decision fatigue, it's just a bit of a ball ache, it's time consuming. Whereby to make this process as simple and as uncomplicated as possible is you should be able to get up in the morning and you should be able to track your food for the entire day confidently, knowing what you've got to eat, what you've got available. Hopefully, in some circumstances, you're going to have these foods prepped. And therefore, it's just a case of getting home, not having to think about what you need to make, just simply a case of looking in your MyFitnessPal, getting out what you need and cooking it. And that way, you are having meals that you enjoy, most importantly. You're creating the most satiety from your meals because this is pre-planned, so we're going to try and get as much volume from our food as possible with obviously adequate protein, plenty of fibre, loads of veggies, and it takes away, again, that decision fatigue. You're not having to scramble around thinking what can you fit into your remaining calories for that day. The process becomes a lot easier. And I think that's something that a lot of people overlook is dieting doesn't mean chicken, rice and broccoli for every meal. Sure, it might be a point where that comes in useful. Just because you're in a diet, it doesn't mean that it needs to be unenjoyable. The 2 to 3 options I had for each mealtime were all meals that I enjoyed. Towards the last 2 weeks of the diet, I started swapping the potato out for white rice, just to add some variability and just help with digestion. But I looked forward to every single meal. I never had a meal that I didn't enjoy. And one of the biggest components of this is I wasn't relying on things like table sauces, things like mayo, barbecue sauce, things like that quite quickly add calories into your meals. I was using a lot of seasoning, so chili, garlic, salt, pepper, all these things that are virtually next to no calories that can massively highlight the flavour profile of your food and make it enjoyable without taking away from the volume of your overall meal. And that's really, really important. And whilst this process is super simple, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get hungry. Inevitably, whilst you're in a dieting phase, you're going to get hungry at times. And if anything, I would actually say it's a good sign, because probably 6 weeks in, I felt very, very comfortable from a satiety point of view. 6 weeks on, hunger started to creep up. Hunger and cravings, sometimes it's hard to differentiate between the two, Probably cravings start to kick in a little bit sooner. Hunger didn't kick in till maybe 4 weeks out. Um, and to some degree, sometimes energy levels will start to dip. But because I was managing my food in such a way, energy levels stayed pretty good until like the last 2 weeks of the shoot. So training performance, because the quality of the food remained high, I was as satiated as I could possibly be. And I was making sure that I was fueling my workouts. So depending on the time I trained, which more often than not was late afternoon, my lunch would have a good source of carbohydrates in, either potato, either rice, obviously, and then the veggies. And it'd be exactly the same for the evening, which meant my training was fueled well, and then I would recover properly from it as well. I only trained 4 times a week, so I was able to enjoy higher calories for 4 days of the week. The 3 that I wasn't training did get tough, because towards the end, when food went down to 2,500, it gets pretty tough when you're a large human like myself. So, as I say, it's not easy, but it is simple. And just sticking to some of these basic rules makes your life so much easier, because you don't need as much variety as you think you do. I certainly don't. I'm a creature of habit, as most of us are. It's just our habits generally aren't very good. So, now I've come out of the diet, my meals have stayed exactly the same. The only thing that's changed is I'm able to eat more of the foods that I was already having. And that should be the same approach when you're going through your diet, is as your calories reduce, you have to just manipulate some of the variables. So it might be that you have to pull down some of your potato, it might mean that you have to pull down some of your rice in order to hit your new carbohydrate target. You might keep your veggies where they're at. It might be the other way around. You might pull some of your veg down if you're having a lot of it to keep your complex carbs higher. And by following this approach, I saw a very, very quick change in physique and on the scales within the first couple of weeks, which, as I say, then keeps the motivation high, keeps you pushed. Started to see veins where there previously weren't veins. I've got to a point where I'm the leanest I've ever been, but I've maintained far more muscle mass than ever before, because I've kept to what many would call a boring approach. But it's only boring if you don't like your meals. I've thoroughly enjoyed them all. There's not one meal that I've ever been sick of. And now I get to eat more of it. So happy days. From a training perspective, I've trained 4 days a week. My training split was as follows: lower, pull, upper, and arms, which seems like quite an unconventional training split, but currently I'm waiting on an operation to fix a pretty mangled shoulder. So any sort of chest pressing, any shoulder pressing, any general push movements are virtually out of the equation, other than very, very light, just to sort of go through the motions and keep the joint moving. From that perspective, training wasn't ideal, but there's not a huge amount I could do about it. That's not necessarily come about as a result of the diet. It's just a circumstantial thing that I've been dealing with since last September. On the cardio front, however, this is something that was significantly ramped up throughout the dieting phase. And this is weirdly something that I enjoy, because it forces on your routine. And routine is one of the key elements in dieting successfully. So initially it started off at 4 rounds of 20 minutes every week. For me, I like to get up early and go and get it done before starting my day. So it's done, nothing to worry about, can just crack on with your day thereafter. As the diet progressed, it then got to the point towards the 6-week mark where it became daily. So it was 30 minutes daily on the Stairmaster, which, yes, by the end got challenging. It is tough, but ultimately, if you want to get lean, these are the trade-offs that you're going to have to make. In the last sort of 3-4 weeks of the diet, it was 4:30 a.m. wake up, to the gym, 45 minutes of gentle walking just to increase my activity, again getting ahead of it for the day whilst my energy levels were at their best. Then doing half an hour on the Stairmaster, which then gave me the breathing room to do any PT sessions that I was doing, get home, eat, sit in front of the laptop, expend minimal energy effectively, and recover before going back to the gym after 2 meals to then train, to get home, and then to work or relax. And it really is that simple. It's not complex. People make it a lot harder than it needs to be. And I think people confuse a diet being simple with a diet being hard. Making it simple just makes it easier to adhere to, but it doesn't mean it's going to get any less difficult. You are inevitably going to get hungry whilst dieting. Your energy levels eventually are going to dip. That's part and parcel of the process. My mantra is very much get in and out of the dieting phase as fast as possible. I don't want to spend any more time than necessary feeling hungry, with high cravings, having to say no to things. I would rather spend a 12-week period in this instance saying no to certain things, declining social events, or going and not sort of being involved, for the trade-off that in 12 weeks time I'm going to look the best that I ever have, and then I can get back to normal life. In this instance right now, I've done this just in time for summer, so now I get to enjoy the summer in the best shape I've been in without having to restrict any particular elements of my life, because now the diet is over, the food has gone back up, appetite is starting to downregulate, energy levels feel great, training performance is fantastic, and I can start to facilitate and enjoy life a little bit more. And if this is something that you've always struggled with and you don't really know what to do, I do have a free 4-week program to help you lose up to 5 kilos that will talk you through everything I've just discussed in this video. All you have to do is sign up using the link in the comments below, and that will talk you through how to shift your first 5k whilst keeping the process as simple as possible. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.